The alpha called her fat in front of 300 wolves, stripped her title, banished her to live with the pack's weakest Omega as punishment. What he didn't know, that frail Omega saw something in her no one else did. A glowing mark on her back that would make her the most powerful wolf alive. And he wasn't letting anyone hurt her again. The scent of humiliation hung thick in the autumn air, mixing with the wood smoke from the ceremonial bonfire that crackled at the center of Moonridge Pack's gathering circle. Raina Matthews stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs as 300 pairs of eyes turned toward her like predators catching wind of wounded prey. "Look at her." Alpha Darvin's voice boomed across the clearing, his perfectly sculpted jaw twisted in disgust. "Look at what I've been cursed with as my Luna." The pack members, werewolves who had once bowed to her with respect, now whispered and snickered behind their hands. Raina's cheeks burned with shame as she felt their gazes rake over her curvy frame, taking in every soft curve that didn't match their pack's obsession with lean muscle and predatory grace. 26 years old, and she can barely keep up on our morning runs, Darvin continued, his steel-gray eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "Tell me, Luna." He spat the title like it tasted bitter. "When was the last time you shifted? When was the last time you hunted with us? Let us." Raina's wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, wanting to defend them both, but years of Darvin's constant criticism had worn her confidence down to nothing. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, her voice trapped somewhere between her heart and throat. The alpha's perfectly white teeth flashed in what might have been a smile if it had held any warmth. "Exactly. You're nothing but dead weight, Raina. A disgrace to everything this pack stands for." Beta Marcus, Darvin's right hand and childhood friend, laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe if she spent less time in the kitchen and more time training, she'd actually look like a Luna instead of a. He paused dramatically, his voice dripping with false consideration. "Well, I was going to say Omega, but that would be an insult to Omegas." The crowd erupted in laughter, and something inside Raina's chest cracked like ice over a frozen lake. She'd endured years of Darvin's emotional abuse, convincing herself it was just his way of pushing her to be better. But this public humiliation in front of her entire pack felt like a knife twisting in her heart. "You want to know why I never hunt with you?" Raina's voice cut through the laughter like a blade, surprising everyone, including herself. The clearing fell silent except for the snap and hiss of burning wood. Darvin's eyebrows shot up. In all their years as mates, she'd never once talked back to him in public. "Because every time I've tried," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "you've made sure to humiliate me. You've paired me with the fastest runners, knowing I'd fall behind. You've given me the most difficult prey to track, then mocked me when I couldn't keep up with wolves who've been training since they were pups." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the submissive, apologetic Raina they knew. "You've spent 6 years trying to break me down instead of building me up," she said, her brown eyes flashing with newfound fire. "That's not the mark of a strong alpha. That's the mark of a weak man who's threatened by his own mate." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Darvin's face transformed from shock to pure rage. His wolf surged so close to the surface that his eyes flashed from gray to golden amber. "How dare you," he growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble that made several pack members step back. "How dare you question my leadership after years of coddling your weakness?" "Coddling?" Raina laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Darvin, you haven't shown me kindness since our mating ceremony. You've made sure everyone in this pack sees me as a burden, a joke, Enough." Darvin's roar echoed through the trees, sending birds scattering from their perches. His power rolled over the assembled werewolves like a crushing weight, forcing most to lower their eyes in submission. But Raina didn't look away. For the first time in years, she held his gaze without flinching. "You want to challenge me?" "Fine." His lips pulled back in a snarl, revealing canine teeth that were sharper than any human's. "But I won't waste my time fighting someone who isn't even worth the title of pack member, let alone Luna." He turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. I, Alpha Darvin Blackwood, reject Raina Matthews as Luna of Moonridge Pack. She is no longer worthy of standing at my side or leading this pack. Gasps echoed through the crowd. A Luna could only be stripped of her title under the most extreme circumstances. It was considered one of the greatest shames a she-wolf could endure. But Darvin continued, his smile returning with cruel satisfaction. I'm not completely heartless. Since she seems so concerned about her omegas, she can go live with them. Specifically, his gaze swept the crowd until it landed on a slight figure near the back. With Eli Carson. More gasps. Eli Carson was known throughout the pack as the weakest omega they'd ever had, a scrawny, nervous young man who couldn't even defend himself against aggressive squirrels, let alone other werewolves. Eli. Darvin's voice cracked like a whip. Step forward. The crowd parted reluctantly, revealing a thin man with sandy brown hair and kind hazel eyes that were currently wide with terror. He looked like he'd rather face a silver bullet than walk to the center of the circle, but he obeyed, his hands trembling at his sides. Congratulations, Darvin said with mock cheerfulness. You're now responsible for our former Luna. Keep her fed, keep her housed, and make sure she doesn't cause any more trouble. Consider it your contribution to pack stability. Eli's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed a barely audible, "Yes, Alpha." The pack watched with a mixture of shock and entertainment. Raina Matthews, who had once worn designer clothes and lived in the pack house's finest suite, was being sent to live with an omega who barely scraped by in a rundown cabin on the territory's outskirts. This is what happens, Darvin announced to the crowd, when someone forgets their place. Let this be a lesson to anyone else who thinks they can question my authority. Raina felt tears threatening, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Instead, she lifted her chin and met Darvin's triumphant gaze one last time. You're right about one thing, she said quietly, but her words carried in the sudden silence. I did forget my place. I forgot that I'm worth more than your cruelty. She turned her back on him, on all of them, and walked toward the trilene where Eli waited, his expression a mixture of sympathy and terror. As she passed through the crowd, she caught fragments of whispered conversations. Can't believe she talked back to him like that. Always knew she was too soft to be Luna. Poor Eli, stuck with damaged goods. Each word was another crack in her heart, but Raina kept walking. Behind her, she heard Darvin address the pack again, his voice already moving on to other business, as if she'd never mattered at all. But as she reached the edge of the clearing, something flickered to life in her chest. Not the broken submission she'd felt moments before, but something fiercer. Something that tasted like defiance and possibility. Darvin Blackwood had no idea what he'd just unleashed. The walk through the dense pine forest felt like a funeral march. Eli moved silently ahead of Raina, his slight frame barely disturbing the fallen leaves beneath their feet. Every few steps, he'd glance back nervously, as if expecting her to collapse or maybe just disappear entirely. 20 minutes from the main pack grounds, they emerged into a small clearing where a modest log cabin sat like an afterthought. The structure looked like it had been built decades ago and maintained by someone who cared more about function than beauty. The roof sagged slightly on one side, and the front porch steps creaked ominously under Eli's weight. It's not much, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. But it's warm and dry. The roof only leaks when there's a really bad storm. Raina stared at the cabin that would now be her home. Just this morning, she'd woken up in a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets. She'd had her own bathroom with a marble shower, a walk-in closet filled with clothes she'd never wear again, and windows that overlooked the pack's beautiful central gardens. Now she was standing in front of what looked like a hunting shack, about to share space with a stranger who seemed more afraid of her than sympathetic to her situation. The bathroom's inside, Eli continued, fumbling with a set of keys that looked older than both of them combined. Hot water takes a few minutes to kick in, and sometimes the pressure isn't great, but it works. There's a spare bedroom. Well, It's more like a closet, but there's a bed and a small dresser. He pushed open the door, and Raina followed him into a space that could have fit inside her former bedroom 3 times over. The main room served as kitchen, dining room, and living room all at once. A small couch faced a stone fireplace, and a wooden table with 2 mismatched chairs sat near a window that looked out into the forest. Despite its size, the cabin was spotlessly clean and smelled like pine wood and something that might have been homemade bread. "I made some soup earlier," Eli said, moving toward the kitchen area with quick, nervous movements. "You probably haven't eaten since this morning, and the walk here was long, so I thought." "I don't need your pity," Raina snapped, her emotions finally boiling over. "I don't need you to take care of me like I'm some kind of wounded animal." Eli froze, his hand halfway to a cabinet handle. I didn't think." "Just show me where I'm supposed to sleep." Her voice was sharper than she'd intended, but the humiliation from earlier was still fresh, still burning in her chest like acid. Without another word, Eli led her to a door barely wider than a closet entrance. Inside was exactly what he described: a twin bed with a faded blue quilt, a small dresser with 3 drawers, and a window so tiny it looked like it belonged on a ship rather than in a bedroom. Raina sank onto the bed, without looking at him. "Thank you," she managed, though it came out stiff and formal. "I'll be in the main room if you need anything," Eli said softly before closing the door behind him. For the next 3 days, Raina barely left the tiny bedroom. She could hear Eli moving around the cabin, could smell him cooking meals that he left outside her door on a small wooden tray. He never knocked, never called out to her, just left the food and quietly took away the empty dishes later. On the 4th morning, she woke to the sound of voices outside her window. Peering through the small pane of glass, she saw 3 pack members, all betas by their confident postures, standing near Eli's garden. They were laughing at something, their voices carrying clearly in the morning air. "Look at this pathetic excuse for vegetables," one of them said, kicking over a carefully tended row of tomato plants. "No wonder omegas are always hungry if this is the best they can grow." "Hey, Eli," another one called toward the cabin. "Come out here and clean up this mess before Alpha Darwin decides you're wasting pack resources on failed crops." Raina watched Eli emerge from the cabin, his shoulders already hunched in submission. He didn't argue, didn't defend his obviously well-maintained garden. He just nodded and began gathering the scattered plants, his hands gentle even as he tried to save what could be salvaged. "Maybe if you spent less time playing house with the Alphas Reject and more time on useful work, you wouldn't be such a disappointment," the 3rd beta said, earning more laughter from his companions. Something hot and fierce flared in Raina's chest. These weren't disciplinary measures or pack business. This was just cruelty for the sake of cruelty. She'd lived at the top of the pack hierarchy for 6 years, but she'd never really seen how the Omegas were treated on a daily basis. The betas left eventually, still laughing among themselves. Eli spent another hour in his ruined garden, carefully replanting what he could save and cleaning up the rest. He never once looked toward the cabin, never called for help or sympathy. That evening, Raina finally emerged from her room. Eli was at the stove, stirring something that smelled like chicken and herbs. When he saw her, his hand stilled on the spoon. "I saw what happened today," she said quietly. His shoulders tensed. "It's nothing unusual. They were just checking on things." "They destroyed your garden, Eli." "That wasn't checking on anything." He turned back to the stove, his voice even quieter than before. "It'll grow back." Raina studied his profile, the slight curve of his nose, the gentle line of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead in soft waves. There was something almost ethereal about him, like he belonged in a painting rather than in this harsh world of pack politics and power struggles. "Why don't you fight back?" she asked. "Because fighting back makes it worse," he said simply. "For all of us. All of us. The other Omegas. When one of us causes trouble, we all pay for it." He glanced at her then, his hazel eyes serious. "You'll learn that soon enough." For the first time since arriving, Raina felt something other than anger or self-pity. She felt protective. Eli had taken her in without question, had fed her and given her space to grieve, had endured mockery from the other pack members without complaint. And now she was learning that he did it all while living under constant threat of retaliation. "The soup smells good," she said finally. Eli's face lit up with the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "It's ready if you'd like some. And there's fresh bread. I baked it this morning." As they sat across from each other at the small wooden table, sharing a simple meal in comfortable silence, Raina realized something that surprised her. For the first time in years, she felt genuinely peaceful. There were no expectations here, no constant criticism, no walking on eggshells around someone's volatile temper. Just kindness. Simple, uncomplicated kindness. It was more than Darwin had ever given her. The storm hit Moonridge territory like the wrath of angry spirits, turning the peaceful autumn evening into a nightmare of howling wind and torrential rain. Lightning split the sky in brilliant white fractures while thunder shook the small cabin's windows in their frames. Raina had been outside gathering firewood when the first drops began to fall. What started as a light sprinkle quickly escalated into a deluge that soaked through her clothes in seconds. By the time she made it back to the cabin, she was drenched and shivering, her hair plastered to her skull, and her clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. "Oh no," Eli said, rushing toward her with a stack of towels the moment she stumbled through the door. "You're soaked through. You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch pneumonia." Raina's teeth were chattering too hard to argue. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the span of an hour, and her human form wasn't handling the sudden cold well. Her wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, wanting to shift for warmth, but she'd barely shifted in months. The thought of trying now, while weak and cold, seemed more dangerous than staying human. "The bathroom's too small for you to change comfortably," Eli said, his voice practical and concerned. "And the hot water heater is acting up again. It'll take forever to warm up enough for a proper shower." He moved toward the fireplace, already building up the flames. "I'll heat some water on the stove for a bath. It'll be faster and warmer than waiting for the hot water heater to cooperate." 20 minutes later, Eli had filled a large metal tub near the fireplace with steaming water, adding some kind of herbal mixture that smelled like lavender and eucalyptus. He draped blankets around the area to create privacy, then retreated to the kitchen to give her space. "The water's perfect," Raina called out, sinking into the warmth with a grateful sigh. The heat immediately began working on the deep chill that had settled into her bones. She'd been soaking for several minutes when another massive thunderclap shook the cabin, this one so close it felt like it was directly overhead. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. "Raina?" Eli's voice came through the darkness. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she called back, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. The combination of stress, cold, and now sitting in complete darkness was making her feel vulnerable in ways she hadn't experienced since childhood. She heard Eli moving around the cabin, the scratch of matches being lit, and soon the warm glow of candles began to push back the darkness. "The power lines probably came down," he said, his voice closer now, just on the other side of the blanket barrier. "This old cabin's not exactly built for modern electrical systems anyway." Another flash of lightning illuminated the windows, followed immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundation of the cabin. The storm was getting worse instead of better. "Eli?" Raina's voice was smaller than she intended. I think I might need help getting out. I'm feeling a little dizzy." The combination of hot water, stress, and emotional exhaustion was making her head swim. She tried to stand but found her legs unsteady beneath her. "Can I come in?" Eli asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I'll keep my eyes closed, I promise." "Yes," she said, though part of her wondered why she trusted this virtual stranger more than she'd ever trusted her own mate. Eli appeared around the edge of the blanket barrier, one hand covering his eyes while the other held a large towel. "Just tell me where you need me," he said. "I can stand, I just need..." She reached for his free hand to steady herself as she rose from the tub. "Thank you." He wrapped the towel around her shoulders without looking, then helped guide her toward the couch near the fireplace. It wasn't until she was seated and he was turning to leave that the candlelight hit her back in just the right way. Eli froze. "Raina," he whispered, his voice filled with something that sounded like awe. "You're back. What about it?" She tried to look over her shoulder, suddenly self-conscious. She knew there were scars there, old wounds from a rogue attack when she was 16, plus some newer ones from training accidents that Darvin had dismissed as signs of her weakness. There's a mark. It's glowing." "That's impossible," Raina twisted around, trying to see what he was talking about. "Scars don't glow, Eli." But even as she said it, she could feel something different, a warmth spreading across her shoulder blades that had nothing to do with the fire or the bath. "May I?" Eli asked, his hand hovering near her back, but not quite touching. "I need to see this more clearly." Raina nodded, and Eli gently moved the towel aside. His sharp intake of breath confirmed that whatever he was seeing was significant. "It's the mark of the moon goddess," he breathed, his voice filled with reverence. "I can't believe. I mean, I've only seen drawings in the old books, but this is unmistakable." "The what?" Raina tried to turn around completely, but Eli gently stopped her. "Don't move. I need to see all of it." His fingers traced the air just above her skin, not quite touching but following some patterns she couldn't see. "It's a crescent moon surrounded by stars, but the stars are moving, shifting like they're alive. And there are ancient symbols around the edges, prophecy markings." "Eli, you're scaring me." "What are you talking about?" He moved around to face her, his hazel eyes bright with excitement and something that looked almost like hope. "The mark of the moon goddess appears on the one chosen to unite the packs, to transform our world. It's from the old prophecies, the ones most wolves have forgotten or dismissed as legend." Raina shook her head, pulling the towel more tightly around herself. "That's ridiculous. I'm not chosen for anything. I'm not even a proper Luna anymore. I'm barely a pack member." "That's exactly why it makes sense," Eli said, kneeling in front of her, so they were at eye level. "Think about it, Raina. Why do you think Darvin worked so hard to break you down? Why did he spend years convincing you that you were worthless?" "Because I am worthless," she said automatically, the words coming out like a reflex after years of hearing them. "No," Eli's voice was firm in a way she'd never heard from him before. "Because he was afraid of you. Some part of him, maybe unconscious, recognized what you really are. So he did everything he could to keep you weak, to keep you from discovering your true power." Raina stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or delusion. But Eli looked completely serious, completely convinced. "The mark only appears when the chosen one is ready to begin their transformation," he continued. "When they've been broken down enough to be rebuilt stronger. When they've learned humility and compassion through suffering." Another flash of lightning illuminated the cabin, and for just a moment, Raina could swear she felt something stirring inside her. Not her wolf, but something deeper, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. "I don't know how to be what you're describing," she whispered. "You don't have to know yet," Eli said gently. "But you have to start believing that you're worth more than Darvin ever let you think." As if responding to his words, the mark on her back pulsed with warmth, and for the first time in years, Raina felt something that might have been hope. The next evening, as darkness settled over the forest like a heavy blanket, Eli appeared in the doorway of Raina's small room carrying 2 water bottles and what looked like workout clothes. "Put these on," he said, setting the clothes on her bed. "We're going outside." Raina looked up from the book she'd been reading, one of Eli's collection about pack history and ancient werewolf lore. "Outside? It's almost midnight."
Exactly.
"No one will see us." His usual nervous energy was replaced by something more determined. "If you really do carry the mark of the moon goddess, then we need to start preparing you for whatever's coming. And that means training." "Eli, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but when was the last time you shifted?" he interrupted, his hazel eyes serious in the candlelight. Raina fell silent. The honest answer was embarrassing. It had been nearly 4 months since she'd last let her wolf form emerge. Darvin had made so many cutting comments about her wolf being sluggish and ungainly that she'd eventually stopped shifting altogether. "That's what I thought." Eli's voice was gentle but firm. "Your wolf is dying inside you, Raina. And if she dies, you die. The mark won't matter. You won't have the strength to fulfill whatever destiny it represents." 20 minutes later, they stood in a small clearing about half a mile from the cabin. The moon was only a sliver in the sky, providing just enough light to see by without being too exposed. Eli had changed into dark clothing that allowed him to blend into the shadows, and he moved with a quiet grace that Raina found surprising. "First things first," he said, beginning to stretch in ways that looked more like yoga than typical werewolf training. "Your human form needs work before we even think about shifting. You've been sedentary for too long." "I wasn't sedentary," Raina protested, though even as she said it, she realized how weak the argument sounded. "I did pack duties, I attended meetings." "Standing around looking decorative is an exercise," Eli said, not unkindly. "When was the last time you ran? Really ran, not just walked quickly across the pack grounds?" Raina couldn't answer because she honestly couldn't remember. "That's okay," Eli said, beginning a series of movements that flowed from one to the next like a dance. "We'll start small. Copy what I'm doing. These are flexibility exercises to wake up muscles you haven't used in a while." For the next hour, Eli led her through stretches and basic movements that should have been easy for any werewolf. Instead, Raina found herself winded and sore within the first 15 minutes. Her body felt heavy and uncooperative, like she was trying to move through thick honey. "I can't do this," she gasped, collapsing onto the grass after attempting what Eli had called a simple lunge sequence. "I'm too out of shape. This is hopeless." "Get up," Eli said, and there was steel in his voice she'd never heard before. "Eli." "Get up, Raina." He moved to stand over her, his slight frame somehow seeming larger in the moonlight. "Do you think the moon goddess chose someone who gives up after 1 hour? Do you think destiny cares if you're tired?" Something in his tone made her wolf stir, responding to the authority in his voice despite his Omega status. "I've watched you for years," he continued, his voice softening but losing none of its intensity. "Watched you endure Darvin's cruelty. Watched you smile and nod while he tore pieces of your soul away bit by bit. If you can survive that, you can survive some sore muscles." Raina pushed herself up onto her elbows, then slowly stood. Her legs shook with fatigue, but she remained upright. "Again," Eli said simply. They returned to the clearing every night for the next 2 weeks. Slowly, painfully, Raina's body began to remember what it felt like to move with purpose. Her stamina increased, her muscles strengthened, and most importantly, her wolf began to stir more frequently. On the 15th night, something changed. They were practicing basic combat moves, nothing fancy, just blocks and dodges that any pack member should know, when Raina felt heat bloom across her shoulder blades. The mark was glowing, she realized, responding to her physical exertion and growing confidence. "That's it," Eli breathed, watching her movements with something like pride. "Do you feel it? Your wolf is waking up." Raina did feel it. Her senses were sharper than they'd been in months. She could hear a mouse rustling in the underbrush 50 yards away, could smell the distinct scents of at least 3 different rabbits that had passed through the clearing earlier that day. Even her eyesight seemed enhanced, picking out details in the darkness that should have been invisible. "Try shifting," Eli suggested. "Just partially, let your claws come out, maybe extend your canines a little." The partial shift had always been difficult for Raina, requiring precise control that she'd never quite mastered. But now, with the mark pulsing warmly against her skin, it felt as natural as breathing. Her fingernails extended into sharp claws, her canine teeth lengthened, and her already enhanced senses amplified even further. "Incredible," Eli whispered. "You're beautiful like this." The words sent an unexpected flutter through Raina's chest. Darvin had never called her beautiful in any form. He'd made it clear that her wolf was a disappointment, that her human form was too soft, that everything about her was inadequate. But the way Eli was looking at her now, with admiration and something deeper, made her feel powerful for the first time in years. "How do you know so much about training?" she asked, shifting back to fully human form. "You're an Omega. When would you have learned combat techniques?" Eli's expression grew guarded. "I read a lot, and I've had to defend myself more than you might think." There was something he wasn't telling her, but Reyna didn't push. They all had secrets, and Eli had earned the right to keep his. As they walked back toward the cabin, Reyna realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. The nervous, apologetic Omega who had taken her in 3 weeks ago was gone, replaced by someone confident and capable. And she was no longer the broken, defeated former Luna who had arrived at his doorstep. "Thank you," she said quietly as they reached the cabin's front porch. "For what?" "For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Eli smiled, and in the dim light from the cabin's windows, his face looked almost ethereal. "The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, Reyna. She chose you, for a reason." As she drifted off to sleep that night, Reyna could still feel the mark tingling against her skin, and for the first time since her banishment, she felt genuinely excited about what tomorrow might bring. The first whisper reached Darvin's ears on a Tuesday morning during the Pack's weekly council meeting. Beta Marcus leaned close to the Alpha's chair, his voice barely audible over the discussions about territory patrols and hunting schedules. "There are stories," Marcus murmured, his eyes darting around the room to ensure no one was listening. "Strange ones. Some of the night patrol wolves say they've seen lights in the forest near the Omega quarters. Blue lights, moving through the trees like spirits." Darvin's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he kept his expression neutral. "Spirits don't exist, Marcus. Tell the patrol to stop drinking before their shifts. It's not just one wolf, Alpha. 3 different patrol teams have reported it over the past 2 weeks. And there's something else." Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to say. "Some of the pack members are asking about Reyna." The leather armrest of Darvin's chair creaked under the pressure of his grip. "What about her?" "Wondering where she is, how she's doing. A few of the younger females have even asked if they could visit her." Marcus's voice dropped even lower. "There's talk that maybe you were too harsh, that." "That's enough." Darvin's voice was quiet, but carried the unmistakable thread of violence. "Anyone questioning my decisions can join her in exile. Make that clear." But as the meeting continued, Darvin found his attention wandering. Reyna had been gone for nearly a month now, and he'd expected her to come crawling back within a week, broken, apologetic, begging for forgiveness. The fact that she hadn't even attempted to contact him was unsettling. More unsettling were the reports of strange activity near the Omega quarters. Darvin had banished her to die slowly among the weakest members of his pack, but instead, there were stories of mysterious lights and unexplained phenomena. After the meeting ended, he pulled Marcus aside. "I want surveillance on the Omega district," he said quietly. "Discreet surveillance. I want to know what every Omega is doing, who they're talking to, and especially what's happening with Reyna." "You think she's planning something?" Marcus asked, though his tone suggested he found the idea ridiculous. "I think a desperate wolf is a dangerous wolf," Darvin replied. "And I want to know exactly how desperate she's become." 3 miles away, Reyna was discovering that desperation could indeed be dangerous, but not in the way Darvin imagined. She and Eli had just finished another night training session when they heard voices approaching through the forest. Eli immediately moved to shield Reyna with his body, his enhanced hearing picking up details she couldn't yet discern. "It's okay," he whispered, relaxing slightly. "It's Maya and Connor." 2 figures emerged from the treeline, a middle-aged woman with graying brown hair and a young man who couldn't have been more than 19. Both carried the submissive posture typical of Omegas, but their eyes held something Reyna had never seen in Omega wolves before: hope. "Is it true?" Maya asked without preamble, her voice trembling with excitement. "About the mark? About what you're destined to become?" Reyna glanced at Eli, confused. "How do they know about?" Word spreads quickly among Omegas. Connor interrupted, his young face bright with anticipation. We have our own communication networks. We have to. It's the only way we survive. Maya stepped closer, her weathered hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. My daughter was killed 3 years ago during a pack hunt. Alpha Darwin said she was too slow, that her death was natural selection. But she wasn't slow, she was pregnant, and she was trying to protect her unborn pup. Raina's heart clenched. She remembered that hunt, remembered Darwin's casual dismissal of the Omega's death as the weak being culled from the herd. We've been waiting, Connor added, his voice gaining strength. All of us, we've been waiting for someone to challenge the way things are. Someone to stand up for wolves who can't stand up for themselves. I'm not a leader, Raina said quickly, the familiar anxiety rising in her chest. I'm barely managing to take care of myself. You challenged the alpha in front of the entire pack, Maya said, her eyes shining. Do you know how long it's been since anyone had the courage to do that? How long we've dreamed of seeing someone stand up to him? Eli moved closer to Raina, his protective instincts clearly activated. This is dangerous, he said quietly. If Darwin finds out that Omegas are gathering around her, he'll kill us all, Connor finished matter-of-factly. We know. But Maya's right, we've been dying slowly for years anyway. At least this way, we die fighting for something better. Over the next week, more Omegas began appearing at the edge of the clearing during training sessions. They didn't interfere or make demands, they simply watched, their faces filled with a mixture of hope and desperation that broke Raina's heart. There was Elena, whose mate had been reassigned to a beta female because their pairing was deemed genetically inferior. There was Thomas, who'd been forbidden from using his gift for healing because Omegas weren't allowed to practice medicine. There was Sarah, barely 18, who'd been told she was too weak to bear children and should consider sterilization for the good of the pack. Each story was another crack in the foundation of everything Raina had once accepted as normal. They're putting themselves at incredible risk just by being here, Eli said one evening as they watched a group of 7 Omegas disappear back into the forest. If Darwin's spies spot them, he has spies watching us? Raina asked, though she wasn't entirely surprised. Of course he does. Did you really think he'd just let you disappear without keeping tabs on what you're doing? Eli's expression was grim. I've noticed the same sense around the cabin for the past few days. Beta wolves trying to stay downwind, but not quite managing it. The mark on Raina's back pulsed with warmth, and she could feel her wolf stirring restlessly. The growing attention from other Omegas, the surveillance, the whispered stories of hope and rebellion, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle she wasn't ready to solve. What if they're right? She asked quietly. What if I am meant to do something about the way Omegas are treated? Eli was quiet for a long moment, his hazel eyes reflecting the firelight from their small campfire. Then we need to be very careful about how we proceed, he said finally. Because the moment Darwin realizes you're becoming a threat, he won't just exile you. He'll make sure you disappear permanently. As if summoned by his words, a howl echoed through the forest, long, mournful, and unmistakably alpha. It was Darwin's voice, carrying across the territory like a warning. Raina shivered, but not entirely from fear. The mark on her back was glowing brighter now, responding to the challenge in that howl with something that felt dangerously like anticipation. The time for hiding was almost over. The confrontation came at dawn, when the forest was still shrouded in mist, and the only sounds were the distant calls of awakening birds. Raina had gone to the stream to fetch water, leaving Eli alone in the cabin to prepare breakfast, when 3 figures emerged from the treeline like shadows given form. Alpha Darwin stood at the center, flanked by Beta Marcus and another enforcer Eli recognized as Derek Cross, a wolf known for his particular talent in making problems disappear. All 3 radiated the kind of predatory confidence that made Omega wolves instinctively bare their throats in submission. Eli's hands trembled as he set down the wooden spoon he'd been using to stir the oatmeal, but he forced himself to remain upright, meeting Darwin's steel-gray eyes despite every instinct screaming at him to look away. Alpha, he managed, his voice barely steady. To what do I owe this honor? Darvin's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Cut the formalities, Omega. We both know why I'm here. He gestured casually toward the forest where Reyna had disappeared. My sources tell me interesting stories about your house guest. I don't know what you mean, Eli said, though his heart was hammering so hard he was certain they could all hear it. Mysterious lights in the forest. Gatherings of Omegas where there should be none. And most fascinating of all, Darvin stepped closer, his presence filling the small cabin like a toxic cloud, reports of someone matching Reyna's description moving through the trees with abilities no Omega should possess. Marcus spoke up from behind his alpha. We found claw marks on trees half a mile from here.
Deep ones.
The kind only a very powerful wolf could make. Eli's mouth went dry. He and Reyna had been careless 2 nights ago, letting her practice her enhanced abilities without checking for evidence afterward. They'd been so focused on her growing power that they'd forgotten about basic precautions. Here's what's going to happen, Darvin continued, his voice dropping to the dangerous rumble that preceded violence. You're going to tell me exactly what's been going on here. You're going to explain why my former Luna hasn't come crawling back to beg for forgiveness. And then you're going to help me end this little fantasy before it becomes a real problem. I can't do that, Eli whispered, the words escaping before he could stop them. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Derek's hand moved to the silver blade at his hip, a weapon specifically designed for dealing with rebellious pack members. Excuse me? Darvin's voice was silk over steel. Eli closed his eyes, thinking of Reyna's face when she'd first felt the mark glowing, of the way she'd slowly begun to believe in herself again, of the hope he'd seen kindle in the eyes of every Omega who'd witnessed her transformation. I said I can't do that, he repeated, louder this time. Darvin was across the room in a single fluid motion, his hand closing around Eli's throat with crushing force. You seem to be under the mistaken impression that you have a choice in this matter. Alpha, Marcus said nervously. Maybe we should. Quiet. Darvin's grip tightened, and Eli felt his feet leave the floor. I'm going to make this very simple for you, Omega. Tell me what I want to know, and I might let you live. Continue to protect her, and I'll make your death so slow and painful that other wolves will hear about it for generations. Eli's vision was starting to blur from lack of oxygen, but through the haze, he saw something that made his heart soar and break at the same time. Reyna stood in the doorway, the water bucket forgotten at her feet, her eyes blazing with fury and power. The mark on her back was glowing so brightly that it was visible through her shirt, casting blue-white light across the cabin walls. Her partial shift had already begun, claws extended, canines lengthened, her entire presence radiating the kind of authority that made even alphas take notice. Let him go, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible for any wolf, let alone a banished Luna. Darvin dropped Eli immediately, spinning to face this new threat. His eyes widened as he took in her transformed appearance, the way power seemed to roll off her in waves. Well, he breathed, his confidence faltering for just a moment before reasserting itself. The little mouse has found some claws.
How?
Cute. Last warning, Reyna said, moving into the cabin with predatory grace. Step away from him. Derek moved to flank her, his silver blade gleaming in the supernatural light emanating from her mark. Alpha, whatever she is now, she's still just one wolf. We can. He never finished the sentence. Reyna moved with speed that defied physics, disarming him and sending him crashing through the cabin's front window in less than 2 seconds. The sound of splintering wood and Derek's pained cry from outside made Marcus take several involuntary steps backward. Impossible, Darvin whispered, but there was fear creeping into his voice now. You're nothing. I made you nothing. You tried, Reyna agreed, helping Eli to his feet without taking her eyes off the alpha. But some things can't be unmade, no matter how hard you try to destroy them. Darvin's own partial shift began, his body expanding with muscle and barely contained violence. I should have killed you years ago instead of trying to break you slowly. Consider that my one regret as I tear your throat out. The blood moon ceremony is in 3 days, Reyna said, ignoring his threat entirely. I challenge you for leadership of this pack. Formal combat, witnessed by all, according to the old laws. The challenge hung in the air like a physical thing. Marcus made a choking sound. Derek groaned from somewhere outside, and Darvin's face cycled through surprise, rage, and finally, cruel amusement. A challenge. He laughed, the sound harsh and grating. You want to fight me? Officially? In front of everyone? I want to end your reign of terror, Reyna said simply. And I want every wolf in this pack to see exactly what kind of leader you really are. Darvin's smile returned, sharper than ever.
Done.
3 days from now, under the blood moon, I'll show everyone what happens to wolves who forget their place. He started toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Reyna, when I'm done with you, I'm going to make your little Omega friend watch while I scatter your remains across the territory. Consider it a lesson in the price of loyalty. After they left, Reyna collapsed into Eli's arms, the supernatural glow fading as exhaustion took its toll. Are you insane? Eli whispered, holding her tightly. He'll kill you. Actually kill you, not just exile you. Maybe, Reyna said quietly, but I can't keep hiding while other wolves suffer. And I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you doesn't matter. Eli pulled back to look at her, his eyes wide with surprise. Reyna. I love you, she said, the words coming out in a rush. I don't know when it happened or how, but I love you, Eli. And if I'm going to die fighting for something, I want it to be for a world where wolves like us can love without fear. As Eli's lips met hers in their first kiss, the mark on Reyna's back pulsed with warmth that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with hope. 3 days to prepare for the fight of their lives. 3 days to transform from survivors into warriors. 3 days to change everything. The blood moon rose like a crimson eye over Moonridge territory, casting everything in shades of red and shadow that made the ancient ceremonial grounds look like something from a nightmare. Every member of the pack had gathered in the stone circle that had witnessed challenges for over 2 centuries, alphas, betas, and omegas alike forming concentric rings around the fighting pit at the center. Reyna could feel 300 pairs of eyes on her as she stood at the edge of the outer ring, but for the first time in her life, the attention didn't make her want to disappear. The mark on her back pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, its blue-white glow visible even through the thick leather jacket Eli had insisted she wear for protection. I still think this is suicide, Eli whispered beside her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Darvin has 20 years of combat experience. He's never lost a challenge. He's never fought the moon goddesses chosen before, Reyna replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of intense training, with Eli pushing her harder than ever while pack members loyal to Darvin had made increasingly bold attempts at intimidation. But something had shifted in her during those final preparations. The scared, broken wolf who had been banished was gone, replaced by someone who moved with purpose and power that felt as natural as breathing. Pack of Moonridge. Darvin's voice boomed across the ceremonial grounds as he stepped into the stone circle. He had dressed for the occasion in ceremonial leather armor that emphasized his muscular frame, and his presence commanded immediate silence from the assembled wolves. Tonight, under the blood moon of our ancestors, we gather to witness the folly of a traitor. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many pack members, especially the older ones, looked uncomfortable with the proceedings. Formal challenges were rare, and most wolves understood that they represented serious cracks in pack unity. 3 months ago, I showed mercy to a wolf who had forgotten her place, Darvin continued, his steel-gray eyes scanning the crowd until they found Reyna. I could have killed her for her disrespect, but instead, I allowed her to live among the Omegas, hoping she would learn humility. Several wolves in the crowd snickered at this, though Reyna noticed that many others remained silent. Instead, Darvin's voice rose to a roar, She has spread poison among our weakest members. She has filled their heads with delusions of power and rebellion. She has dared to claim abilities that belong only to true alphas. That's because I am a true alpha, Reyna called out, stepping forward through the crowd. The sea of wolves parted before her like water, many of them gasping as they saw the glowing mark clearly for the first time. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Wolves who had dismissed her as weak and pathetic now stared in awe at the supernatural light emanating from her back. The mark had grown brighter and more complex over the past 3 days, with intricate symbols and patterns that seemed to shift and move like living things. Impossible, someone whispered from the crowd. The prophecy, another voice breathed. She carries the prophecy mark. Darvin's confident expression flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. Parlor tricks and Omega delusions, he sneered. You think some glowing tattoo makes you worthy to lead this pack? I think leading with compassion instead of fear makes me worthy, Reyna replied, stepping into the stone circle. I think protecting the weak instead of terrorizing them makes me worthy. I think treating all wolves as valuable instead of disposable makes me worthy. Pretty words from a fat failure who couldn't even satisfy her mate, Darvin shot back, earning cruel laughter from his supporters. But this time, the words bounced off Reyna like rain off stone. You're right about one thing, Darvin. I wasn't a good Luna for you. Because I never should have accepted the role of decoration and punching bag. A real Luna leads beside her alpha as an equal, not beneath him as a victim. The mark on her back flared brighter, and Reyna felt the change beginning. Not just a partial shift this time, but something deeper, a transformation that pulled power from sources beyond her individual wolf. Enough talk, Darvin snarled, his own shift beginning as muscle and bone expanded beneath his ceremonial armor. Time to remind you why alphas rule and Omega serve. He launched himself across the circle with inhuman speed, claws extended, and aimed at Reyna's throat. It was a killing strike, meant to end the fight in seconds and send a message to any other wolves who might be harboring rebellious thoughts. But Reyna wasn't there when his claws arrived. She had moved with fluid grace that defied physics, her enhanced abilities allowing her to sidestep his attack and counter with a strike that sent him stumbling backward. The crowd gasped as they realized that not only had she avoided his killing blow, but she had done it with room to spare. What? Darvin started to say, then cut himself off as he saw her fully transformed state. Reyna's wolf form was magnificent in a way that had nothing to do with size or traditional pack standards. She radiated power that made the air itself seem to hum with energy. Her eyes glowed with inner fire, her claws gleamed like silver, and the mark on her back had expanded into a pattern of symbols that covered most of her torso. My turn, she said quietly. What followed could barely be called a fight. Darvin was strong, experienced, and vicious, but he was battling something beyond individual strength. Every strike he threw was countered. Every attempted dominance was met with power that seemed to flow from the moon itself. When he tried to overpower her with brute force, she moved like water around his attacks. When he attempted to use his alpha authority to compel her submission, her mark blazed brighter and deflected his influence entirely. When he resorted to dirty tactics, going for her eyes, trying to cripple her legs, she responded with mystical abilities that left him reeling. The final moment came when Darvin, desperate and bleeding from a dozen wounds, made one last attempt at a killing strike. He threw everything he had into a leap that would have crushed any normal wolf beneath his weight and claws. Reyna caught him midair, her hands glowing with power as she held his much larger form suspended above her. For a heartbeat, the entire pack held its breath. Then she spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ceremonial grounds. I could kill you now. The old laws would support it. You challenged, you lost, your life is forfeit. Darvin struggled in her grip, his eyes wide with fear and disbelief. But that's not the kind of leader I want to be, Reyna continued. You'll live, Darvin. You'll live to see what this pack becomes when it's built on strength that protects instead of strength that destroys. She released him, letting him fall to the stone ground in a heap of defeated alpha. Then she turned to face the assembled pack, her mark still blazing like a beacon in the crimson moonlight. "Who stands with the old ways?" she called out, her voice carrying to every corner of the ceremonial grounds. "Who believes that might makes right, that the strong should prey on the weak?" Silence. "And who stands for a new way? A pack where every wolf matters? Where omegas are protected instead of persecuted? Where leaders serve their people instead of ruling through fear?" The first voice that answered was Maya, the omega who had lost her daughter. "I stand with you, Luna." Then Connor joined in, then Elena, then Thomas. Within moments, a chorus of voices rose from every ring of the assembled pack, not just omegas, but betas who had grown tired of Darwin's cruelty, alphas who remembered what leadership used to mean. As the blood moon reached its zenith above them, Reyna felt the final transformation complete itself. She was no longer the broken, banished wolf who had arrived at Eli's cabin. She was exactly what the moon goddess had always intended her to be. A leader worthy of her people's trust. The silence that followed the chorus of support stretched for several heartbeats before the first wolf dropped to one knee. It was Beta Marcus, of all people, Darwin's former right hand, his face a mixture of awe and genuine remorse as he lowered his head in submission. "Forgive me, Luna," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the ceremonial grounds. "I was blind to what you truly were, to what you were meant to become." Like dominoes falling, the rest of the pack followed suit. Alphas who had once dismissed her, betas who had mocked her behind her back, omegas who had never dared dream of such a moment, all of them kneeling beneath the crimson moon, acknowledging not just her victory, but her right to lead them. Even Darwin, still crumpled on the stone ground where she'd left him, managed to lower his head in defeated acknowledgement of her new status. Reyna stood at the center of it all, the mark of the moon goddess still blazing across her back like a constellation brought to earth. The power flowing through her felt infinite, connected to something vast and ancient that stretched back through generations of her kind. But more than that, she felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 300 lives now looked to her for guidance, protection, and hope. "Rise," she said, her voice gentle but carrying the unmistakable authority of true leadership. "In my pack, wolves don't kneel unless they choose to. We stand together as equals." As the pack slowly got to their feet, Reyna's eyes found Eli at the edge of the crowd. He was watching her with an expression of pure pride and love, tears streaming down his face as he witnessed the full transformation of the broken woman he'd taken in just months before. She walked toward him, the crowd parting respectfully as she moved. When she reached him, she took his hands in hers, her glowing mark casting both of their faces in ethereal light. "There's something I need everyone to understand," she said, raising her voice, so every pack member could hear. "The old ways are ending tonight. No more will omegas be treated as less than other wolves. No more will strength be measured only by the ability to dominate and destroy." She turned to face the assembled pack, still holding Eli's hands. "From this moment forward, we measure strength by wisdom, by compassion, by the courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves. We measure leadership not by fear commanded, but by trust earned." Her voice grew stronger with each word, the mark on her back pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. "And there's something else you need to know," she continued, her eyes finding faces in the crowd. "Maya, Connor, Elena, Thomas, all the omegas who had risked everything to believe in her. Eli Carson is not just the wolf who saved my life. He's not just the one who helped me discover my true power." She turned back to Eli, her face glowing with more than just supernatural light. "He's my chosen mate, my equal in all things, my partner in building the future this pack deserves." The gasps that rippled through the crowd were audible even over the crackling of the ceremonial fires. A Luna choosing an omega as her mate was unprecedented. It shattered every tradition, every hierarchy, every assumption about how their world was supposed to work. "That's impossible," Someone called out from the crowd, one of the older alphas, his voice filled with shock. The bloodlines, the traditions. The traditions that allowed wolves like Darwin to terrorize anyone they deemed weak. Reyna's voice cut through his protest like a blade. The traditions that told Maya her daughter deserved to die? That convinced Elena she wasn't worthy of love? That made Thomas hide his healing gifts because Omegas weren't allowed to practice medicine? She gestured to the wolves she'd named, and each of them stood straighter, their faces shining with hope and validation. Those traditions end tonight. We build new ones, traditions based on the content of a wolf's character, not the circumstances of their birth. Eli squeezed her hands, his own voice trembling with emotion as he spoke. Are you sure about this, Reyna? Choosing me will make leading harder. There will be wolves who never accept. She silenced him with a kiss that lit up the ceremonial grounds brighter than the blood moon itself. When they broke apart, both of them were glowing, not just from the mark, but from something deeper, more fundamental. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. You saw strength in me when I couldn't see it myself. You believed in me when I was nothing but broken pieces. If that's not worthy of an alpha's love, then the whole system deserves to crumble. Over the following weeks, Reyna proved that her words weren't empty promises. Thomas was officially appointed as the pack's healer, his Omega status no longer a barrier to using his gifts. Elena was allowed to pursue her true mate bond, regardless of rank considerations. Maya was given a place of honor on the new council Reyna established, her wisdom earned through suffering valued as much as any beta's tactical knowledge. The changes weren't without resistance. Several older pack members left to join neighboring territories rather than adapt to the new order. But for every wolf that departed, 2 more arrived, drawn by stories of a pack where strength served compassion instead of dominating it. The final ceremony came on the next new moon, when Reyna and Eli were officially bonded before the entire pack. As they stood together beneath a star-filled sky, their hands joined and their wolves singing in harmony, the mark of the moon goddess pulsed one final time before settling into a gentle, steady glow. What happens now? Eli asked quietly as the celebration continued around them. Reyna smiled, looking out at their pack, wolves of every rank mingling freely, sharing stories and laughter without fear of retribution. Children played games that didn't involve dominance and submission. Elders shared wisdom with young wolves who listened with respect instead of terror. Now we build the world we always should have had, she said, her voice filled with certainty and hope. Together. Above them, the moon shone down on Moonridge Pack's new beginning, a future where love conquered fear, where strength protected instead of preying, and where 2 wolves who had found each other in the darkness had lit a beacon bright enough to guide their people home. The prophecy was complete, but the real story was just beginning.